I really like what they're doing with Jean Grey. Like in this, Jean Grey, she gets a lot more to do than kind of fall over and go, as she did in the original show.
Jean!
As I've said in other streams and videos that I've made over the years, I grew up watching X-Men, the animated series. I remember when new episodes were actually debuting on television in the 90s. That's how old I am. This show, much like Batman, the animated series, was my introduction to shows like Batman and just the DC universe. X-Men, the animated series was my introduction to X-Men and Marvel Comics. I fell in love with these characters and eventually started reading X-Men comics on a consistent basis and was eagerly awaiting the cinematic adaptations, which we would first get with films like X-Men, which were released in 2000, the first of the Fox era.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning?
But the original show was canceled for a whole host of reasons and, various behind-the-scenes issues and budgetary reasons as well. And it looked like that was the end of that adaptation of the X-Men. But here we are, over 25 years later, and the series has been resurrected and picks up a year after the events of the original show. But before getting into my opinions of the series itself, I'm going to go ahead and provide you guys a little bit of a synopsis. Picking up a year after the events of X-Men, the animated series, the X-Men, still reeling from the loss and absence of their leader, Charles Xavier, fight against nefarious villains and forces that endanger mutant and humankind alike while trying to protect their own family in the process. So, going into this series, I honestly didn't know what to expect in terms of its quality. While I watched the original series growing up alongside Spider-Man, the animated series, both those shows, while fun and entertaining, to me, never reached the same heights of quality in terms of the animation and the storytelling that, DC's animated projects, did. Shows like Batman, the animated series, Superman, the animated series, Batman Beyond, and their various successors, I think were just better to me. Aesthetically and in terms of their writing. So I went into this with pretty reasonable expectations. But at this point, I've watched the first 2 episodes of X-Men 97, and I'm absolutely floored by how good this series is so far. From the animation and action sequences to the voice acting, writing, and surprisingly mature storytelling, this show has triumphantly returned in such a way that is just extremely exciting, not only because I'm an X-Men fan and I like the original show, but because it does something that I really respect and admire with sequels to older animated programs. And that's the fact that it has grown up with its original audience, but is still very respectful and reverent of what came before. The first episode of the series is great because it reintroduces us to the X-Men through the character of Roberto da Costa, who is the New Mutant Sunspot in the comics. When he's, captured by the mutant hate group Friends of Humanity. It establishes the state of mutant kind, how mutants and the X-Men are being viewed by humanity and certain other groups. And it opens with an incredible action sequence that showcases the new animation. It does all that in the span of a few minutes. Now, it's not the same style of animation from the series. It's actually better, in my opinion, but it emulates its aesthetic and lets the characters move and gesture in such a way that looks more natural. They have more of a budget. The money's on full display. Where, back in the day, they were scraping whatever they could get together to try to make that show. And then in the latter seasons, particularly the season 4, when they had it being animated in all these different countries in the Philippines, the animation suffered. People complain about that. That's not the case here. The animation looks great. It has a terrific color palette as well. There's a scene in the first episode that's like at a nightclub rave where like Jubilee is showing off her powers while dancing, and I thought that looked so good. And again, it also just showcased, I think they did that on purpose. Like, we're going to show how these characters are moving, and they're not just kind of like so stilted or just kind of like standing still in the background. And I really liked that. I like the maneuverability of all these people. And also, there's just the sequence, this amazing action sequence at the end of the first episode that has the X-Men battling a legion of zombie-like sentinels, where each character gets to show off their powers, their strengths, and just their teamwork with each other. The Sentinel fight is absolutely incredible. I totally understand why they wanted to showcase that first, opening with a big action sequence and with a big action sequence. And by the time we also get to the second episode, which is also very, very good, and that's when we're kind of focused more on Magneto, which I'll detail in just a bit. They battle a lot more with the anti-mutant hate group, the Friends of Humanity, and they come up against a foe called the Executioners. Very well done, and the way in which the show is tackling the themes of racism and discrimination, at least so far, has been great and handled with care. It's a great sequence, like with the Executioner, and he's just antagonizing Scott, and as he's battling him, and just the dialogue, it kind of hit close to home. It felt like really real. It's like, this kind of is going beyond just being an animated superhero show for children. Like, he's like, as he's beating the hell out of Scott, well, I want to talk more about Scott in just a bit. He's like, the thing I hate about you muties, the thing I hate about you mutants is your whining, is your just incessant whining. And I was just like, it just felt so personal and just showcased the great voice acting so far. And as much as I'm praising the action sequences and how they're handling all these various themes, as I said on another show recently, the thing that came across to me like in spades in terms of, they know exactly what they're doing. Like the writers and the creators of this show. It's like, it's very obvious that they understand the X-Men and what they are. And it comes very early on in the first episode, where it's the conversation in the kitchen, where you have Gambit wearing his crop top, making beignets and various other breakfast foods for everybody. And he's getting into a bit of an argument with Scott over something that happened and how he wanted Gambit to be involved in this operation to save a young Sunspot. And Gambit has his opinion, Scott has his opinion. Rogue comes in, she shares her thoughts on it. Then, very pregnant, Jean Grey, she comes in there and shares her thoughts. And I'm thinking, like, this is it. Because the X-Men, it's like, yes, it's a superhero show, but or the X-Men in general as a concept is like, it's superheroes. But before all that, it's a soap opera. That's what the X-Men is. It's all these people, all these weird people living in this enormous house, and they all have their various thoughts and opinions on things and personalities that are bumping up against each other, rubbing up against each other, fucking each other, right? But at the end of the day, they're a family. They're a dysfunctional family that, yes, they will argue, but they truly love each other. And that comes across in this first episode alone, and obviously in the second. I love that. I was like, oh my God, they're getting it. Like the first moments of the episode, we're just showcasing the action. You get a sense of the world, what the stakes are, how humanity views mutant kind, and how other groups view mutant kind and humanity as well. But then it immediately goes in, and now we're going to show you how the X-Men interact with each other. And it's not them fighting like in a big action scene. It's just a conversation in the kitchen. I was like, you got it. You nailed it. And I love that. And to kind of catapult off that, one of the things I really love about this, the first and the second episode, is how they're portraying Scott Summers so far in this series. And I love the fact that they're not showing Scott to be a dick or an asshole. Because for years, especially in the movies, So probably like the last 30 or so years, nearly 30 years, Scott has been portrayed as a dweeb, someone who is annoying, someone who is whiny all the time, and that's just not who he is in the comics at all. And I've just really hated the fact that you've had these filmmakers or these writers write him in this way. I mean, that's on full display in the X-Men films, especially the Bryan Singer movies, where Scott's an afterthought. You know, he's constantly being punked out by Wolverine. He's written out of the sequels. He's killed off screen in the third. It's like the mistreatment of Scott has really rubbed me the wrong way for years. And you know, and they did the reboot, and I still feel like they underutilized him. And they've underutilized him in the original animated show to a degree. Certainly in other adaptations like Wolverine, the X-Men. Like really the only exception, the only time where I actually loved how they portrayed Scott because they leaned into who he was in the comics was in X-Men Evolution, and I love that. And here, they are portraying him in such a great way. The comparison I would make for mainstream audiences is he's very similar to Chris Evans's Captain America in the Marvel movies. It's like, yes, he has his own thoughts, he has his own opinions, but you understand as to why he's the leader of the Avengers. You understand as to why people like go to him for advice, right? You know, and is he a Boy Scout? Sure. But he never comes across as preachy or domineering, or he doesn't talk down to you. And I really like that. And that is very much the case. Very much the case for Scott Summers Cyclops in this show so far, and I love it. And like how they portray his power in this show, his optic blasts, his concussive optic blast, amazing. You see then the first few minutes of the show how he's just really just showcases the animation, the choreography, how he's weaving around the battlefield, he's propelling himself backward and forward and stuff, and using that momentum to carry him from place to place, point A, point B, point C, and how he's just, you know, able to fight with that while also showing off his mixed martial arts skills against, you know, all sorts of villains and friends of humanity. I thought that was great. His superhero landing, as people are referencing in the chat. Yes, like I love what they're doing with Scott here. And much like what I love what they're doing with Scott, I really like what they're doing with Jean Grey. Like in this, you know, Jean Grey, she gets a lot more to do than kind of fall over and go, as she did in the original show. Jean. Here, Jean is pregnant. She's heavily pregnant. And she has like a lot of concerns for her baby's future. And she details those concerns with Scott. And, you know, they're thinking of doing a certain thing that would kind of change the dynamic of the X-Men. But I like how she interacts with like other people like Storm, and because she needs advice. Because, you know, even though she's had a very interesting life, a fulfilling life, a terrifying life, this is terrifying for her because like I'm about to bring a child into the world, a child that will be feared and hated by so many people. And I am scared about that. And I don't know how I'm going to be able to deal with that and protect them. And I was like, oh my, and this is in like the second episode. And I'm like, wow. And that just goes to show you the mature storytelling and writing on full display. And I love that. And I just mentioned Storm. You know, first of all, I love Storm's design. I love the mohawk. They gave her that, which is so great. It's always been my favorite look for Storm in the comics. And obviously, you know, she plays such a central role in the X-Men. You know, she's very much a veteran and a leader within this group. And a lot of people defer to her for advice. And the same with where Jean talks. They really want to emphasize how close they are. Since they grew up together in the X-Men. I like that comes across within these first two episodes. But something happens to Storm in this episode, and it changes her perspective on a lot of things and what she wants to do. I think that's the thing I'm loving about this is like, you know, so often the X-Men, and when it comes to adaptations, they always seem to just focus on Wolverine like all the time. And I love Wolverine. Believe me, I do. He's great here, but he has like not been the focus. He's there. He's playing a role. He has a dynamic with all these people. He gets actually a really funny thing to do in episode 2, which I loved. But it's not the Wolverine show. It's the X-Men show. And every X-Men is getting something interesting to do or is being set up to do something really cool later on, which I think is awesome. And also just Storm's power set. Oh my God. Like they do stuff with her power set that I want them to later do in the movies. I don't think Storm has been adapted that well cinematically. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people like Halle Berry. I think she's a terrible actress, to be perfectly honest. And how she performed as Storm was not good. But I was like, the way that she's played here, the way in which they showcase her powers, it was like, wow, I would love to see this cinematically. But at least in terms of the show, how they showcase that is great. There's even like a shot that feels like it's straight out of an anime or something. What kind of it culminates. And this huge action sequence and her powers is ending. There's just this huge wide shot. It looks like I'm watching and of course X-Men is inspired by a lot of Japanese anime from the 70s and 80s. But there's like this one shot in the end of episode 1, near the end of episode 1, where it's like, that feels like a shot out of like something like Gundam. And I thought that was awesome. I love that. Magneto is reintroduced at the end of the episode 1. And is the main focus, I would say, of the second episode. How he is perceived by the world is kind of reanalyzed, and he has certain aspirations, and this isn't a bit of a spoiler, but this particular season is adapting the comics in which Magneto does become a leader of the X-Men, which was in Charles Xavier's last will and testament, and Magneto kind of loved rubbing that in the face of all the other X characters, other mutant characters. And it's going to be interesting to see this character portrayed in that way. I mean, I've always loved when Magneto kind of stopped being a villain and became more of either like a neutral figure or the leader of the X-Men or the leader of the New Mutants, which I feel like they're definitely setting up with a character like Sunspot, which is interesting, or maybe at least an iteration of that. They also explore his relationship with Rogue, which goes through a very big evolution due to the fact of something that he can do, and which Rogue, again, thought she would never be able to have with someone. And I don't want to say too much on that, but it's something that they're adapting in the comics, which I think is very interesting. And we'll also set up a new, all I'll say is we'll set up a new love triangle between 3 new characters. And I'm just glad that it's not Jean, Scott, and Logan. It's like, oh, it's these people. I was like, oh, okay, let's see how that'll work out. That'll make that very interesting. Like, my only criticism of Magneto is like his outfit. I'm not a fan of his outfit. the leotard with the giant M. It's like, this is not working at all. They do show him at one point in his original outfit, and it looks great. But I was like, this new kind of like, I'm a sexy Magneto. It's like, you are sexy, man. You got that lion mane of white hair. It looks glorious on you. But this new M suit, I'm not digging it. It's like my one aesthetic critique of the show so far. But as I said before, like, the show's dialogue is surprisingly adult and mature, and it makes me hope that the MCU adaptations of X-Men, which they're going to adapt this material and these books, will look at this series as a source of inspiration. Just because they, at least for right now, are doing everything right. They're honoring the past of what came before in numerous ways, but they're not afraid to go a little darker with it, be a little mature. They've aged up with the audience that, like myself, that was watching this when I was a kid, like many of you, and I think that's great. That was something I honestly did not expect, and at least for right now, it's really, really working for me. And it makes me excited just for the next episodes, because they hint at a lot of other stuff and a lot of other characters and a lot of returning villains. And I'm like, okay, let's see what you got. You've impressed me dramatically. Additionally, I really hope this kicks off a golden age or a Renaissance era for Marvel animation, and have them bring in other Marvel heroes. I won't spoil anything, but there are hints of other Marvel heroes operating and swing around during the events of these episodes, and that is very exciting. And I do wonder, with just the adulation this show is getting. I don't know what the viewership numbers are. I have no idea. But they've greenlit season 2 is and season 3 are in development right now, and so they probably have a lot. They probably realize like, oh, we got something special. We got something really good. So let's go ahead and do that. So that's amazing. But I don't know, Chad. Like, I would not be surprised, because for people that don't know, and this isn't really a spoiler, Spider-Man the animated series and X-Men the animated series take place in the same universe, as does the Incredible Hulk and Fantastic Four. Those shows as well, they did those as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of those characters show up. And even if we don't, I would be like, you need to capitalize on this right now. Who the people that made this show, the writers behind this show, the animators, the animation team, do this with Spider-Man the animated series. Bring that show back, but do it in just the same way they do with X-Men, where you aged it up, you aged it with your audience, and you could have something I think that's really special. You can have a Marvel animated universe that I don't want to be hyperbolic, but with the DC animated universe being what it is, which, they seem to be like doing various iterations, and the DCAU is, that sadly that's in the past. It's like, you have the opportunity to do what DC did back in the day, back in the 90s, and in the 2000s with this, because of the quality of the writing and the animation that's on full display. And I personally love that. So do Spider-Man 98, or I think the last episodes for Spider-Man animated series came out in 1998. So call it Spider-Man 99. That's a good ring to it, chat. Spider-Man 1999. I like that. Do Spider-Man 99. They introduced some Avengers, like the Iron Man. Iron Man had a season. Do the Avengers 2000. Do that. I think that'd be really cool. Make them. I also like that this is a period piece. That's like last thing I wanna touch on. Like, this is very much set. This takes place in 1997. It's like, yeah, they have futuristic technology, the X-Men, the Blackbird, and all that, and the Sentinels, but like they're still using corded phones. The cars all look like they're in the 90s. The TV sets all look like they're in the 90s. I'm just like, man, I love the commitment to the 90s aesthetic. I really like that. It makes it kind of timeless. It's. I've seen a lot of movies recently where they've abused nostalgia. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which does in such a horrible way. X-Men 97 is using nostalgia to assist its storytelling, to assist its world building in a way that is so fun to watch and be immersed in, and I'm loving that. This at least right now. Again, it's 2 episodes, Jeff, which are long episodes, by the way, nearly 30 minutes. Like they're over. It's over 22 minutes. I want to say they're like between 25 and 30. Like how they're using nostalgia is a perfect showcase that other people adapting nostalgic properties or doing sequels nostalgic properties should observe, because it's assisting its animation, its aesthetic, its characters, and its world building, and I'm loving that so far. But in the end, this series at this point has been extremely impressive, and I'm so excited to watch more episodes. And I will most definitely be doing a full season review once all the episodes are out for this season. But what about you guys? I'm actually very curious. What did you think of X-Men 97, at least these first 2 episodes? However many episodes have you watched so far? I think by the time of this specific recording, the 3rd episode will be out to the public. I am very curious about that. People are gonna what they're gonna think of that one. But as always, let me know.
5 minutes later,
they have the audience avatar character of Sunspot, who is from the comics, but it's like, this is like his, introduction to this world. He's like, but it's also the audience's reintroduction or introduction to it as well. And I love that Jubilee is kind of like his is the person that's helping him through this, because that was very much her in the original episode of X-Men the Animated Series. Like, Jubilee was like, I don't know what all this is, and I'm scared, and I don't know what these powers are, and then she's now here for him. And she's trying to help him out, and also kind of hinting at, she's like, yeah, I like you. I was like, ooh, right? Yeah, they do. There's a lot more. There's a lot more innuendo in this too. They're leaning into that, which is fine with me. I don't mind that.
A few moments later.
They're very inspired by Chris Claremont and John Byrne, because these characters talk a fucking lot. And I like that. I don't mind that at all. And I should have brought this up in my review. I'll incorporate this in my review. But the voice acting in the show is great. And they do bring back a number of the original voice actors. Some not, because sadly some of them had passed away. Like Cyclops had to be recast. You have Ray Chase is voicing him here since Norm Spencer died in 2020. But he does a great job. Jennifer Hale is voicing Jean Grey. She previously voiced Jean Grey in Wolverine and the X-Men. So I was like, oh yeah, that was pretty cool. You know, they have Allison Seeley Smith, who voices Storm. Aurora Monroe, she comes back. Cal Dodd it returns to voice Logan, Wolverine in this. And they recast a number of other people. But they brought back as many of the original voice actors as they possibly could, which is awesome. And let me actually see. Oh, yeah, they couldn't bring back... the thing is, like, some of these people, like, sound exactly like the original voice actors. Because I wanted to check if they had brought back Magneto's original voice actor, but sadly not. But they have Matthew Watterson, who's voicing him, does a great job. Since, sadly, Magneto's original voice actor, David Hemblin. Which, by the way, did you guys know David Hemblin was originally offered the role of Magneto for the live-action film in 2000, but he had to pass on it because of his schedule, and eventually went to Ian McKellen. But he sadly passed away in 2020. And and it's just great so far. The roster's also expanded. Bishop has joined the team since his future is ruined. So now he's joined the team at this point. They haven't done too much with him, but he's there. He's been having some interactions with. I think they're doing a good job of giving everyone a scene or someone something to do, but inevitably I feel like, okay, now we're going to have like an episode that's going to focus on them here and this interesting dynamics introduced. Like they really showcase the relationship, the closeness between Logan and Morph, right? In this, and I love how they're showing Morph's power set. He's able to basically transform into like all these different mutants, and so we're seeing like little cameos of certain mutants from the past, which I think is pretty fun. So I'm really liking that. But yeah, the voice cast of who they've been able to bring back, and some of them do sound older because they would be, but for the most part, they all sound really great. I'm really loving what they're doing with the show.
6.5 hours later.
I haven't seen the original series or these new episodes, but to be honest, comparison to a soap opera makes me hesitant to watch it. No, I guess, I think when I say soap opera, it's like, I'm not using it as a pejorative. I'm not using it as a negative. I'm saying it in terms of it's like, when you think of it like a soap opera, it's like all these people like in one location, they all have these back and forths, and their relationships are changing. That's what it is, and it's super over the top. It's just this weird family. That's what the X-Men is. It's this weird family with all these different powers. They all look different from each other, and they all live in one fucking house. and they have arguments. They have arguments, but they love each other inevitably. That's what I mean by a soap opera. I'm not using it in any like in a negative way, not as a pejorative. I'm using it in a very positive way.